Hello and welcome friends. Today we are going to talk about an important topic, that is stress, and simultaneously we are going to talk about the coping strategies for maintaining stress. The main objectives for today's topic will be to understand what stress is, what are the various factors which cause stress, in which we will be talking about stressful life events, the hassles of daily life and the work related stress. We will also be discussing the various coping strategies to deal with stress. Stress is a psychobiological process with both the physiological and psychological components and consequences. An early contribution to the understanding of stress was Walter Cannon's description of the fight or flight response, in which an organism prepares for danger with endocrine and sympathetic nervous system activation. If the danger does not abate, however, the organism remains perpetually aroused. This can lead to deteriorating health as the body continues to divert its resources away from everyday maintenance and towards emergency readiness. Another major contribution occurred when a young Canadian scientist, Hans Selye, accidentally uncovered some of the physiological mechanisms of stress. Selye was experimenting with what he thought was a new sex hormone, which he injected into rats to test its effects. What he ultimately discovered was that a wide range of stressful events, from injection of various substances including his sex hormone to fatigue to extreme cold, led the body to respond with general adaptation syndrome consisting of 3 stages: alarm, resistance and exhaustion. The first stage, alarm, involves release of adrenal and other hormones such as cortisol as well as activation of the sympathetic nervous system. This is what occurs biologically in fight or flight response. Blood pressure, heart rate, respiration and blood sugar rise as blood is diverted from gastrointestinal tract to muscles and other parts of the body that may be called upon for an emergency. The alarm stage cannot last indefinitely, however, and the body may eventually enter the second stage, resistance. The parasympathetic nervous system returns respiration and heart rates to normal. However, blood glucose levels remain high and some stress-related hormones including adrenaline and cortisol continues to circulate at elevated levels. Essentially, the organism remains on red alert with heightened energy and arousal, but it has begun to adapt to a higher level of stress. Remaining on red alert takes its toll, making the organism especially vulnerable to illness. The situation is analogous to a country that deploys all its military troops to one border to protect against an invasion, leaving its other borders unprotected. If the resistance phase lasts long enough, the body eventually wears down and the organism enters a third stage, exhaustion. Physiological defenses break down, resulting in greatly increased vulnerability to serious or even life-threatening diseases. Organs such as the heart that are vulnerable genetically or environmentally are the first to go during this stage. Although stress is a natural part of life, it can be a major behavioral risk factor if it is prolonged or severe, as discussed earlier. It might seem that stressful events happen to people, although this is something the case more often. Stress is a matter of how we perceive events and react to them. Because of this, stress can often be managed or controlled. Stress can be dangerous if it is prolonged or severe, but it isn't always bad. Hence, Selye observed, to be totally without stress is to be dead. That's because stress is mental and physical condition that occurs when we adjust or adapt to the environment. A major step forward in the study of stress came when Richard Lazarus developed his transactional model of stress. According to this view, stress is typically a transaction between the individual and the environment, rather than a property of either the person or the environment alone. Stress entails an individual's perception that demands of the environment tax or exceed her available psychosocial resources. That is, stress depends on the meaning of an event to the individual. An event that fills one person with excitement, such as new business opportunity, can make another feel overwhelmed and anxious. The extent to which an event is experienced as stressful, therefore, depends on the person's appraisal of both the situation and her ability to cope with it. Lazarus' model identifies 2 stages in the process of stress and coping. In a primary appraisal of the situation, the person decides whether the situation is benign, stressful, or irrelevant. If she appraises the situation as stressful, she must determine what to do about it. In the second stage, secondary appraisal, the person evaluates the option and decides how to respond. Both stages involve emotional forecasting, predicting what feelings the situation will produce, and predicting the likely emotional impact of each potential response. Some of the major causes of stress. What factors contribute to stress? Unfortunately, the list is a long one. A wide range of conditions and events seem capable of generating such feelings. Among the most important of these are major stressful life events, such as the death of loved one or a painful divorce. They all too frequent minor hassles of everyday life, conditions and events relating to one's job or career, and certain aspects of physical environment. Stressful life events: death of a spouse, injury to one's child, war, failure in school or at work. Most of us experience traumatic events and change it at some time or other. For example, a study of people who lost a spouse or child in an accident indicated that for many bereaved persons, distress lasts as long as 4 to 7 years after a sudden loss. Symptoms of prolonged distress, including depression, sleep disturbance, fatigue, panic attacks, loneliness, and increased mortality rate. Parents who had unexpectedly lost a child were at substantially higher risk for divorce. Another major stressor, unemployment, can also impair physical and mental health, although the effects are generally not as dramatic as that of a spouse. The effect on a given person depends on the individual's vulnerabilities to these specific stressors. For example, unemployment can be devastating because of the financial strain on an individual or family. It can also lead to marital strain, forced relocation, and loss of social contact with friends from work. Thus, even a person who has other sources of income, such as unemployment compensation or savings, may experience lowered self-esteem, loneliness, or anxiety following unemployment. The hassles of daily life. While certain events such as the death of someone close to us are clearly stressful, they occur relatively infrequently. Does this mean that people's lives are mostly a serene lake of tranquility? Hardly, as all of us know, daily life is filled with countless minor annoying sources of stress, termed hassles, that seem to make up for their relatively low intensity by their much higher frequency. That such daily hassles are an important cause of stress is suggested by the findings of several studies by Lazarus and his colleagues. Individuals are confronted with the multiple common hassles, everyday events, such as having too many things to do at once, shopping, and concern over money. Although such events may seem relatively minor when compared with the life change studies by Holman and Rehe, they appear to have important effects. In short, the more stress people report as a result of daily hassles, the poorer their psychological well-being. Work-related stress. As we spend sufficient amount of time at work, it's not surprising then that jobs or careers are a central source of stress. Some of the factors producing stress in work setting are obvious. For example, sexual harassment, discrimination, or extreme overload, being asked to do too much in shorter time. Interestingly, being asked to do little can also cause stress. Such underload produce intense feeling of boredom, and these in turn can be very stressful. Several other factors that play a role in work-related stress may be less apparent. One of these is role conflict, being the target of conflicting demands or expectations from different groups of people. For example, consider the plight of many beginning managers. Their subordinates often expect such persons to go to bat for them with the company to improve their work assignments, pay and conditions. In contrast, the manager's own bosses often expect them to do the opposite, somehow to induce the employees to work harder for fewer rewards. And the work-related factor that can sometimes generate intense level of stress involves performance appraisal, procedures used for evaluating employees' performance. If employees perceive these as fair, employee stress tends to be low. And if employees view them as arbitrary or unfair, it's almost certain to be high. After all, no one wants to feel that rewards such as raises, promotions, or bonuses are being distributed in an unjust manner. Now, dear friends, we'll be talking about the stress management. Stress management is the use of behavioral strategies to reduce stress and improve coping skills. Third, our emotions are greatly affected by how we appreciate situation. That's why some people are distressed by events that others view as thrill or a challenge. What does it mean to feel threatened by a stressor? Certainly, in most day-to-day situations, it doesn't mean you think your life is in danger. Threat has more to do with the idea of control. We are particularly prone to feel stressed when we cannot or think we cannot control our immediate environment. In short, a perceived lack of control is just as threatening as an actual lack of control. A sense of control also comes from believing you can reach desired goals. It is threatening to feel that we lack competence to cope with life's demands. Because of this, the intensity of your body's stress reaction often depends on what you think and tell yourself about a stressor. That's why it's important to learn to think in ways that ward off the body's stress responses. You have appraised a situation as threatening. What will you do next? There are two major choices. Both involve thinking and acting in ways that help us handle stressors. In emotion-focused coping, we try to control our emotional reactions to the situation. For example, take a walk to relax or seek emotional support from others. In contrast, problem-focused coping is aimed at managing or correcting the distressed situation itself. Some examples are making a plan of action or concentrating on your next step. Sometimes the two types of coping aid one another. Say, for example, that a woman feels anxious as she steps to the dais to give a speech. If she does some deep breathing to reduce her anxiety, she'll be better able to glance over her notes to improve her delivery. In general, problem-focused coping tends to be especially useful when you are facing a controllable stressor. That's a situation you can actually do something about. Emotion-focused efforts are best suited to managing stressors you cannot control. Frustration. Frustration is a negative emotional state that occurs when people are prevented from reaching desired goals. Obstacles of many kinds cause frustration. A useful distinction can be made between external and personal sources of frustration. External frustration is based on conditions outside a person that impede progress towards a goal. For example, failure, rejection, loss, having a marriage proposal rejected, etc. In other words, external frustrations are based on delays, failure, rejection, loss, and direct blocking of motivated behavior. External obstacles can be either social or non-social. If you ask your friends what has frustrated them recently, most will probably mention someone's behavior. As social animals, we humans are highly sensitive to social sources of frustration. Personal frustrations are based on personal characteristics. If you want to pursue medical subjects and will acquire C grade, you will get frustrated. If you expect a high-profile job and could not perform well in an interview, you will likewise be frustrated. In both examples, frustration is actually based on personal limitations. Yet, failure may be perceived as externally caused. Coping with frustration. Persistence that is inflexible can turn into stupid, stereotyped behavior. When dealing with frustration, you must know when to quit and establish a new direction. Some suggestions may help you avoid needless frustration. Try to identify the sources of your frustration. Is it external or personal, as discussed earlier? Is the source of frustration something that can be changed? How hard would you have to work to change it? Is it under your control at all? If the source of your frustration can be changed or removed, are the necessary efforts worth it? The answer to these questions help determine if persistence will be futile. There is value in learning to accept gracefully those things that cannot be changed. It is also important to distinguish between real barriers and imagined barriers. All too often we create our own imaginary barriers. For example, I want to be a teacher, but when I applied, I was told that you didn't have required qualification. That's bad, which made me frustrated because I do not have the required qualification, so I quit looking for a job. For me, the barrier is real enough to prevent efforts, but with persistence, I may locate an unlocked door. Conflict. In psychology, conflict is the arousal of two or more strong motives that cannot be solved together. Conflict occurs when a person must choose between contradictory needs, desires, motives, or demands. choosing between job and scholarship for higher studies, marriage and single life, or study and failure, or common conflicts. Approach conflict. A simple common approach conflict comes from having to choose between two positive or desirable alternatives. Choosing between ice cream and cold drinks may throw you into a temporary conflict. However, if you really like both choices, your decision will be quickly made. Even when more important decisions are at stake, approach conflict tends to be the easiest to resolve. Avoidance conflict. Being forced to choose between two negative or undesirable alternatives creates an avoidance conflict. A person in avoidance conflict is caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, failure and hard work, or choosing between dentist and tooth pain. These examples can be defined on the basis of personal needs and values. In avoidance conflict, you have a situation where you require choosing between the two negative choices, and not choosing may be impossible or equally undesirable. For example, a situation where you are caught between a monotonous job and poverty. Because avoidance conflicts are stressful and rarely solved, people sometimes pull out of them entirely. This reaction, called leaving the field, is another form of escape. Approach avoidance conflict. Approach avoidance conflict is also difficult to resolve. In some ways, they are more troublesome than avoidance conflict because people seldom escape them. A person in an approach avoidance conflict is caught by being attracted to and repelled by the same goal or activity. Attraction keeps the person in the situation, but its negative aspects cause turmoil or distress. For example, working in reputed companies which offer handsome salary is an attraction, but simultaneously demanding extraordinary credentials from their employee cause fear. It depends on the employee's relative strength of his attraction and his fear. Almost certainly he will feel ambivalent about joining the company, knowing that he will be encountered by heavy demands. Ambivalence, which is mixed positive and negative feelings, is a central characteristic of approach avoidance conflict. Ambivalence is usually translated into partial approach. Some other examples of approach avoidance conflict are wanting to buy a car but not wanting to make monthly payments, wanting to eat when you are overweight. People in conflict are usually faced with several dilemmas at once, so several types of conflicts may be intermingling. In real life, it's common to face approach avoidance conflict in which there are several alternatives, each have positive and negative features. On a day-to-day basis, most multiple approach avoidance conflicts are little more than an annoyance. When they involve major life decisions such as choosing a career, a school, or a job, they can add greatly to the amount of stress we have. Managing conflicts. How can we handle conflicts more effectively? Most of the suggestions made earlier concerning frustration also applies to conflicts. However, some additional things needs to be remembered when you are in conflict. Don't be hasty when making important decisions. Take time to collect information and to weigh pros and cons. Hasty decisions are often regretted. Try out important decisions partially when possible. Wanting to join any college, some reputed company, spend some time there so that an evaluative decision could be taken place. Look for workable compromises. Again, it's important to get all available information. If you think that you have only one or two alternatives and they are undesirable or unbearable, seek aid from your teachers, friends and counselors or the concerned. When all else fails, make a decision and live with it. Indecision and conflict exact a high cost. Sometimes it's best to select a course of action and stick with it unless it is very obviously wrong after you have taken it. And another very important source for coping with stress is social support. The presence of others in whom you can confide and from whom one can expect help and concern. Social support is important for maintaining physical as well as mental health. A high level of social support is associated with protection against range of illness from hypertension and herpes to cancer and heart disease. However, conflicts are a normal part of life. With practice, you can learn to manage many of the conflicts you will face. Dear friends, with this we may conclude that stress is a process that occurs in response to situation or events that disrupt or threaten to disrupt our physical or psychological functioning. It's a fact of life. Stressors are all around us at work, in our environment and in our personal lives. Because stress arises from so many different factors and conditions, it's probably impossible to eliminate it completely. But we can apply techniques to lessen its potentially harmful effects. With this, we come to the end of today's lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.